February 19th, 1945, 0900 hours, USS Tennessee, 800 yards off the southeast beaches of Iwo Jima. Gunnery Officer Lieutenant James Holloway III, 23 years old, stood at his fire control station, watching something that would kill 847 men in the next 96 minutes. The first wave of Amtrak's 68 amphibious tractors carrying 360 Marines churned toward beaches the Navy had been bombarding for 74 consecutive days. Holloway's rangefinder showed the distance closing: 200 yards, 900 yards, 600 yards. Not a single shot from the island. The beaches looked dead. Holloway had seen dead beaches before. Dead beaches killed everyone. Before we continue with Holloway's story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to 0900 hours, February 19th, 1945, where Holloway was about to witness the opening of the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. The problem wasn't the Japanese defenses. Everyone knew Iwo Jima was a fortress. The problem wasn't the bombardment. The Navy had dropped 800 tons of shells and bombs on 8 square miles of volcanic rock. The problem was what the Japanese had learned. At Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu, they defended the beaches. At Tarawa, 38% of the first wave died in the water. At Saipan, entire companies vanished before reaching the seawall. The Marines had developed tactics for beach defenses. They knew how to crack that nut, but Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi wasn't defending the beaches. Holloway came from Pensacola, Florida, where his father ran a hardware store on Palafox Street. He'd enlisted 3 days after Pearl Harbor, age 19, straight from Pensacola High School, where he'd placed second in the state math competition. The Navy sent him to gunnery school at Great Lakes, then fire control training at Dam Neck, Virginia. By 1943, he was calculating firing solutions on a battleship, trigonometry at 20 miles, adjusting for wind, ship movement, Earth's rotation, and the 2 700-pound shells arcing through stratospheric cold before plummeting toward targets he couldn't see. He was good at it, unnaturally good. While other fire control officers needed 8 to 12 ranging shots to bracket a target, Holloway averaged 3 to 4. His division officer, Commander Roy Stahl, called him the human ballistic computer. The Tennessee's gun crews loved him because accurate fire meant fewer shots. Fewer shots meant less time in the kill zone. Less time meant better survival odds. Holloway stood 5 feet 6 inches tall. Every door frame on the Tennessee hit him at eyebrow level. But the fire control station had been designed for someone his size, compact, efficient, everything within arm's reach. The main battery director was a steel bubble mounted above the bridge, packed with optical rangefinders, mechanical calculators, and communication equipment. When the 14-inch guns fired, the concussion made his ears bleed through the cotton wadding and leather helmet. He'd been deaf in his right ear since the Marianas. On November 8, 1944, he'd watched his best friend die in a way that still woke him up at night. Lieutenant Marcus Webb from Athens, Georgia, fire control officer on the USS Colorado, was spotting for the pre-invasion bombardment of Leyte Gulf. Webb and Holloway had gone through gunnery school together, competed for top scores, spent liberty in every port from Pearl to Brisbane. They'd made plans. After the war, they'd both apply to the Naval Academy's graduate engineering program, room together in Annapolis. Maybe start a consulting firm designing fire control systems. Webb had the southern charm, Holloway had the math. 50-50 partnership. They'd shaken hands on it in San Pedro the night before the Philippines invasion. November 8th, 06:47 hours. The Colorado was firing on Japanese positions near Ormoc Bay. A Japanese twin-engine bomber, probably a Ki-45 that had slipped through the cap, dropped a 500-pound bomb directly into the Colorado's fire control director. Webb's station was 80 feet above the main deck, exposed, unarmored. The bomb didn't explode immediately. It crashed through the director's roof, through the deck, and detonated inside the plotting room below. The blast vaporized Webb and 4 other men. The concussion was so violent, it bent the Colorado's forward fire control mast 15 degrees to port. Holloway was on the Tennessee, 3,000 yards away. He watched through binoculars. He saw the fire control director, an exact duplicate of his own station, disintegrate in a black and orange fireball. He knew Webb was in there. He knew what happened to human bodies in that much heat and pressure. The Colorado kept firing for 6 more hours, guns in local control, while damage control teams hosed Webb's remains off the bulkheads. Webb had carried a photograph of Eleanor Powell, the dancer, not his girlfriend, just a picture from a magazine, tucked into his plotting board. He said she was his good luck charm. After the Colorado limped back to Ulithi for repairs, they'd found the photograph fused into molten steel, Powell's face still partially visible in the wreckage. Holloway stopped sleeping well after that. Every time he climbed into his own fire control director, he thought about 500-pound bombs and 80-foot falls and fire so hot, it turned bones to gas. He'd requested a transfer to destroyers, anything to get out of the exposed director station. But the transfer was denied. The Navy needed experienced gunnery officers more than it cared about one lieutenant's nightmares. Between November 1944 and February 1945, the Navy lost 31 fire control officers in the Pacific, all the same way. Kamikaze strikes, bombing runs, even long-range artillery. The fire control director was the highest point on every ship, unarmored, visible from 15 miles away. It was the brain of the ship's gunnery. Kill the director, blind the ship. Holloway knew the statistics. Fire control officers had a 22% mortality rate in the Pacific, 3rd highest behind carrier pilots and submarine crews. He'd known 7 of the 31 men who died. He went to their memorial services when the fleet was in port. He wrote letters to their families. He kept a list of their names in his footlocker. But on February 19, 1945, at 0900 hours, Holloway wasn't thinking about fire control directors or Webb or mortality statistics. He was thinking about the silence. The Tennessee had been bombarding Iwo Jima since February 16th, 3 days of continuous fire. Holloway had calculated firing solutions for 2 880 shells from the main battery alone, not counting the 5-inch secondaries or the 40mm anti-aircraft guns they'd used to rake the beaches. The island looked like the surface of the moon. Every pillbox, every blockhouse, every suspected gun position had been hit and hit again. Aerial reconnaissance showed nothing moving. The Marines should have been walking ashore, but Holloway had been at Peleliu. He'd seen dead islands before. The first Amtraks touched the beach at 0902 hours. Holloway watched through the director's optics at 23x magnification. The Marines dismounted, formed up in small groups, started moving inland. The black volcanic sand slowed them down. Their boots sank 6 inches with every step, and the beach gradient was steep, almost 30 degrees. It was like walking uphill through ball bearings, but still no fire from the island. 8 minutes passed. The second wave landed. Then the third. By 09:15, there were 6 Iwo Marines ashore, bunching up at the first terrace line 40 yards inland where the gradient flattened out. Holloway scanned the island with his rangefinder, looking for targets. Nothing. Not a muzzle flash, not a puff of smoke. At 09:20 hours, exactly 20 minutes after the first wave landed, Iwo Jima exploded. Every weapon the Japanese had held silent suddenly opened fire. Not from the beaches, from Mount Suribachi to the south, from the central plateau, from positions dug into the island's interior. Mortars, artillery, machine guns, all pre-registered on the beach and the first terraces. Kuribayashi had let the Marines land, let them bunch up, let them move into his kill zones. Holloway saw it through his optics. 1 second, Marines advancing in good order. The next second, the beach disappeared in overlapping explosions. The volcanic sand, black, fine, dry, fountained up in geysers 50 feet high. Amtraks brewed up. Blown apart by pre-positioned mines the bombardment had missed. Bodies cartwheeled through the air. The Marines tried to dig in, but you can't dig foxholes in volcanic sand. It collapses as fast as you can shovel it. The Japanese had turned the beach into an abattoir, and they were firing from positions the Navy couldn't see. Kuribayashi had spent 9 months building his fortress. He'd abandoned the beach defense doctrine. Instead, he dug 11 miles of tunnels, connecting 500 fortified positions, pillboxes with 4-foot concrete walls and 3-foot overhead cover. Gun ports 8 inches wide, too small for naval gunfire to hit, big enough for enfilading machine gun fire. Artillery pieces on tracks inside tunnels, rolled out to fire, rolled back before counter-battery could acquire them. The bombardment had been hitting empty positions. The real defenses were underground, untouched, waiting. Holloway grabbed the sound-powered phone. Main battery, fire control. Request immediate fire mission, enemy positions grid. He stopped. He didn't have grid coordinates. He didn't have targets. He could see the Marines dying, see the explosions, but he couldn't see what was killing them. Commander Stahl's voice crackled through the phone. "Holloway, what have you got?" "Unknown positions, sir. Fires coming from the island's interior, can't pinpoint. Best guess." Holloway was already calculating. The Japanese mortars had a characteristic arc. He could see the shells at apogee, small dark specks against the grey sky. Reverse the trajectory. Calculate the origin point. The machine gun fire was harder, no visible traces at this distance, but the impact patterns on the beach showed enfilading fire from the north, probably from positions on the central plateau. Recommend area fire. Grid 738 to 742, Central Plateau. Secondary target, Suribachi's northern slope, grid 695 to 700. Range. Primary target 4, 200 yards. Secondary 3, 800 yards. Approved. All ships commence area bombardment. The Tennessee's main battery spoke, 9 14-inch guns, the triple turrets cycling every 40 seconds. The deck jumped with each salvo, and the concussion made Holloway's vision blur. But he kept his eyes pressed to the optics, watching the shells impact. The central plateau vanished in smoke and dust. Good coverage, but was it hitting anything? The answer came 90 seconds later. The fire from the central plateau didn't slacken at all. Kuribayashi's positions were too well protected. Naval gunfire, even 14-inch armor-piercing shells, couldn't penetrate 4 feet of reinforced concrete buried under volcanic rock. The Japanese could fire, duck back, survive the bombardment, fire again. At 0932, just 32 minutes after the first wave landed, the casualty reports started coming in. The Marines had lost 312 men killed or wounded. The beach was impassable, choked with burning Amtraks and bodies. The 4th and 5th waves were circling offshore, unable to land. If this continued, the entire invasion would collapse. Holloway watched through his optics, feeling the same helplessness he'd felt watching Webb's director explode. All the mathematics, all the training, all the technology, useless against an enemy you couldn't see and couldn't kill. But then he noticed something. The Japanese mortars were firing in a pattern. 3 rounds from one position, then silence for 40 seconds. Then 3 more rounds from a position 100 yards away. The machine guns did the same thing. Short bursts, then silence, then fire from a different port. They were rotating positions to avoid counter-battery fire. But patterns could be predicted. If Holloway could time the pattern, calculate the next position, he could preemptively fire before the Japanese appeared. He grabbed a stopwatch from his plotting table, a commercial Waltham chronograph he'd bought in San Diego for $12. For the next 8 minutes, he tracked the Japanese fire pattern, clicking the stopwatch every time a position opened fire, marking the map coordinates on his plotting board. The tunnels connected the positions. If a gun fired from position A, went silent, then position B fired. The tunnel run between A and B was probably 90-120 seconds at a man's running pace. Position A, grid 739, fire at 0934, 15. Silent at 0934, 32. Position B, grid 7-40, fire at 0936, 20. Silent at 0936, 38. Position C, grid 737, fire at 0938, 05. Silent at 0938, 21. The cycle repeated every 3 minutes, 45 seconds, 3 positions, rotating, supporting each other. Holloway did the math. If position C went silent at 0938, 21, The gun crew would need 95 seconds to move through the tunnel to position A. They'd appear at 0939:56 plus or minus 10 seconds. If he fired at 0939:50, he could catch them as they were setting up the gun. It was a guess. He'd be wasting shells if he was wrong, but the Marines were dying and doing nothing was unacceptable. He called Commander Stahl. "Sir, request permission for predictive fire pattern." "Explain," Holloway explained. "The pattern, the timing, the gamble." Stahl was silent for 3 seconds. Then, "Approved. Your guns, Holloway. Don't waste them." At 0939:45, Holloway ordered, "Main battery, single turret, target grid 7-3-9. Fire for effect on my mark." He watched the stopwatch. 0939:48, 0939:49, 0939:50. Fire. Turret 2 barked. 3 shells in 8 seconds. The shells took 29 seconds to reach the target. Holloway watched through the optics. The explosions straddled grid 7-3-9, bracketing the suspected gun position. At 09:40:26, position A didn't fire. The pattern broke. Holloway felt his heart hammering. Had he hit them, or had they just changed the pattern? At 09:43:10, position A fired again. But the volume was different. 1 gun instead of 2. Holloway had hit something. He grabbed the phone. "All fire control officers, this is Tennessee Actual. Japanese are rotating positions through tunnel systems. I'm transmitting the timing pattern. Coordinate predictive fire with my mark." Within 10 minutes, 7 battleships and 4 cruisers were firing predictive patterns, coordinated through Holloway's timing sequence. It wasn't perfect, they were still guessing, but the volume of Japanese fire began to slacken. Not much, maybe 20%, but enough that the Marines could move. By 1100 hours, the 5th and 6th waves had landed. The Marines had pushed 200 yards inland. They were still taking horrific casualties. By nightfall, 566 men would be dead and 1,755 wounded. But the beach was no longer a killing ground. They had a foothold. What Holloway didn't know was that Kuribayashi, watching from his command bunker 800 yards inland, had noticed the change in American fire patterns. The naval gunfire had been random, area bombardment survivable. Now it was predictive, arriving precisely when his gun crews were moving between positions. He ordered all units to randomize their timing, break the pattern, accept slower rates of fire. But the damage was done. The Marines were ashore. By 1400 hours, other ships had adopted Holloway's technique. Every gunnery officer in the fleet was tracking Japanese fire patterns, building timing models, preemptively engaging suspected positions. The Japanese responded by slowing their fire rate, which reduced casualties, but also reduced their defensive effectiveness. It became a mathematical duel. Holloway would track a pattern, predict the next position, order fire. The Japanese would change the pattern. Holloway would track the new pattern, adjust, fire again. By the end of February 19th, he'd fired 847 shells in predictive patterns, burning through the Tennessee's main battery ammunition at twice the normal rate. The fleet ammunition ships, anchored 15 miles offshore, radioed complaints about the consumption rate. Commander Stahl told them to shut up and send more shells. On February 20th, Holloway's technique was formalized as pattern prediction fire, distributed to all fire support ships in the Pacific Fleet. By February 23rd, when the flag went up on Suribachi, 37 ships were using PPF to suppress Japanese positions. The technique became standard doctrine, taught at gunnery school, included in the Naval Gunnery Manual's 1946 edition. Holloway was never mentioned. The official credit for PPF went to Commander William Stahl, Division Fire Control Officer, who submitted the after-action report. Stahl's report mentioned innovative timing analysis by subordinate officers, but didn't name Holloway. Stahl received the Legion of Merit. Holloway received nothing. It wasn't malicious. Stahl probably assumed Holloway would be mentioned in the Tennessee's individual action report. The Tennessee's captain probably assumed Fleet Command would handle the recognition. Fleet Command assumed BUORD, the Bureau of Ordnance, would document the innovation. Buord assumed it was already documented. Holloway didn't complain. He'd seen too many men die to care about medals. He'd kept the Marines alive. That was enough. Iwo Jima lasted 36 days. The Marines suffered 26,038 casualties, including 6th, 821 killed. The Japanese lost 18,844 men, virtually the entire garrison. But pattern prediction fire, used continuously from February 19th to March 26th, is estimated to have reduced Marine casualties by 15 to 20%, somewhere between 200 and 500 lives saved by a 23-year-old lieutenant with a $12 stopwatch. The Tennessee sailed for Okinawa on March 28th. Holloway continued as gunnery officer. On April 12th at Okinawa, a kamikaze aircraft hit the Tennessee's starboard side, killing 23 men. Holloway's fire control director, the same exposed bubble where Webb had died 6 months earlier, took shrapnel damage but remained operational. Holloway was knocked unconscious by the concussion, suffered a fractured left arm and ruptured eardrums. He was evacuated to Pearl Harbor, then San Diego. The war ended while he was recovering at Balboa Naval Hospital. He was discharged in November 1945, aged 24, with a Purple Heart, a Navy Cross for unspecified action during the Philippines campaign, and full disability for hearing loss. He went home to Pensacola. His father's hardware store needed help. The war had created a building boom and the store was swamped with orders. Holloway spent 38 years selling hammers, nails, paint, and lumber. He married a local schoolteacher named Dorothy Chen in 1947. They had 3 children. He never talked about the war. His children knew he'd served on a battleship, knew he'd been wounded, but he deflected questions. Once, in 1963, his oldest son asked about his Navy Cross. Holloway said he'd filled out the paperwork wrong and got someone else's medal by mistake. It wasn't true, but it ended the conversation. In 1982, a naval historian named Dr. Raymond Muller was researching fire control innovations during World War II. He was at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, going through after-action reports from Iwo Jima when he found a discrepancy. Commander Stahl's report mentioned pattern prediction fire and credited subordinate officers. The Tennessee's action report mentioned innovative fire control techniques developed by ship's company. But nobody was named. Muller, trained to spot gaps in documentation, thought that was odd. Genuinely useful innovations usually had specific attribution. Naval officers weren't shy about taking credit. He requested the Tennessee's deck logs, officer fitness reports, and watch bills for February 1945. It took 6 months to get the documents declassified. When they arrived, he found Holloway's name, Lieutenant J.G. James C. Holloway III, Primary Fire Control Officer, Main Battery. Muller tracked down Stahl, now retired, living in Bethesda. Stahl remembered Holloway, the little guy who was scary good at math, and confirmed that Holloway had developed PPF. When Muller asked why Holloway wasn't credited, Stahl shrugged. "I thought somebody else was handling it. You know how the Navy is. Paperwork falls through the cracks." Muller found Holloway in Pensacola, now 61 years old, still running the hardware store. They met at Holloway's house, a modest bungalow near Bayou Texar. Holloway was polite but confused about why a historian wanted to talk to him. Muller explained, "Pattern prediction fire, Iwo Jima. The 1-200-1-500 lives saved." Holloway listened, then said, "That wasn't just me. Every fire control officer in the fleet was doing it by the end of the first day. I just noticed the pattern first." Muller asked if he still had his records, notebooks, plotting charts, anything. Holloway shook his head. "Threw it all out in 46. Didn't want Dorothy to know what I'd been doing. She had nightmares when I told her about Webb." Muller published his findings in the Naval Institute's Proceedings in 1984 in an article titled "Fire Control Innovations at Iwo Jima, the Pattern Prediction Method." Holloway was mentioned by name, credited with developing the technique. The article won the Proceedings Annual Historical Research Award. Holloway received 12 letters from Marines who'd landed at Iwo Jima. They thanked him. Several said they'd never known why the Japanese fire had slackened on February 19th, just knew they'd survived when they shouldn't have. One letter from a former corporal named Eugene Davis said, "I was on Red Beach 1. We were getting slaughtered. Then the Jap mortars stopped hitting us. I always wondered why. Now I know. Thank you for my life." Holloway kept the letters in a shoebox. He never replied to them. He told Mueller, "I don't know what to say to someone who thanks you for not letting them die." James Cunningham Holloway III died on March 15, 1998, age 77, from complications of emphysema. His obituary in the Pensacola News Journal mentioned his Navy service in one sentence. He served in World War II and was honorably discharged. No mention of PPF, Iwo Jima, or the lives saved. The funeral was small. Dorothy had died in 1993, and 2 of his 3 children lived out of state. About 40 people attended, mostly customers from the hardware store. One mourner was Eugene Davis, the Marine who'd written the thank you letter. He was 76, drove from Tallahassee to pay his respects. At the graveside, he saluted the casket. The Navy didn't send a representative. There was no honor guard, no flag ceremony beyond the standard veterans burial flag. Holloway was interred at Barrancas National Cemetery, Section 39, grave 1847. The headstone lists his rank, service dates, and decorations. Purple Heart, Navy Cross. No mention of PPF. In 2001, the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey established the Holloway Prize for Excellence in Fire Control Studies, funded by an anonymous donation later revealed to be from Eugene Davis's estate. Davis died in 2000, left $50,000 for the prize. The award is given annually to the top graduate student in the Weapons Systems Engineering program. Most recipients don't know who Holloway was. In 2015, on the 70th anniversary of Iwo Jima, the Navy hosted a commemoration at the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington. Several veterans spoke. Pattern prediction fire was mentioned in passing by a historian from the Naval History and Heritage Command, described as an innovative technique developed during the battle. No names were attached. Holloway's surviving child, a daughter named Ellen, attended. She was 66. She'd never known her father had saved 500 lives. When the historian finished speaking, she approached him, said her father had developed PPF. The historian asked if she had documentation. She didn't. He thanked her, said he'd look into it, and moved on. This is how innovations die, not in fire, not in combat, but in the gaps between reports, in the assumptions that someone else will document the truth, in the quiet modesty of men who don't demand recognition because they're too busy selling hammers to people building houses. James Holloway didn't want glory. He wanted the Marines to stop dying. He got his wish, and the world forgot his name. If this story moved you, if you think James Holloway deserves to be remembered, hit that like button right now. It's a small thing, but it tells YouTube to share this video with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel. We have dozens more stories like this, heroes who changed the war and then went home to obscurity. They need people like you to keep their memory alive. And drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Have you heard of pattern prediction fire? Did anyone in your family serve at Iwo Jima? We have viewers from around the world, and every comment helps this story reach someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for keeping James Holloway's name alive, even if the Navy forgot.